Chapter 13 is about store layout and design. This chapter we're going to discuss the place where all retailing activities come together, the retail store. The store can be the most meaningful form of communication between the retailer and its customers. Most important, the store is where sales happen or fail to happen. We'll look at the fact that despite its hundreds of elements, the store has two primary roles: creating the proper store image and increasing the productivity of the sales space. We will identify the most critical elements in creating a successful retail store and describe the art and science of store planning, merchandise presentation, and design. This chapter examines how retailers can use the retail store itself to initiate and continue a relationship with a customer. Retailers must recognize that a retail store is different than an internet site because, for most individuals, shopping is a contact sport. Often consumers want to touch, feel, and experience the merchandise firsthand, and how the store engages and interacts with the shopper is critical to its success. Setting and presentation are critical factors in serving the customer. No other variable in the retailing mix influences the customer's initial perception of the brick-and-mortar retailer more than the store itself. Successful retailers today use their stores as a means to excite their customers, so they will spend more time looking and viewing merchandise, which will subsequently enhance their sales. Just as with brick-and-mortar locations, the first impression of an online store is most important also. There is a limited window of opportunity to capture the attention of online users. There aren't any strict rules of do's and don'ts because the rules are constantly changing, but there are a couple of fundamentals that you should think about. You want to keep your content current. Online consumers browse frequently, so it's important to continually update information on your site. Make the site easy and enjoyable to use. If your site isn't easy to use, customers aren't going to come back to it. And structure an online community where consumers can interact with one another and contribute to the site's content. If customers are able to give reviews and talk to other customers, you could increase sales with that aspect. Although stores composed of literally thousands of details, the two primary objectives around which all activities, function, and goals revolve are store image and space productivity. Before discussing these two objectives, it's important to identify the elements that compose the store environment, which is shown here. So there's visual communications, the retail identity, the graphics, the POS signage. There's store planning, which is space allocation, layout, and circulation. There's store design, which is the exterior design, the ambiance, and the lighting. And merchandising, which is the fixture selection, merchandise presentation, and visual merchandising. The first decision is to decide how to allocate the retailer's most scarce resource, which is space. Space is scarce because it's costly, and a retailer has limited capital it can invest in its stores. Making productive use of the store space through thoughtful space allocation is pivotal to enhancing image and space productivity. The retailer creates a store layout that shows the location of all merchandise departments and the placement of circulation aisles to allow customers to move throughout the store. The presentation of merchandise is a critical factor in the selling power of a store and has a significant effect on the store image. Bookstores can display books either with the cover on the book facing out, called face out, so it's in full view, or with the spine of the book showing where the viewers can see the titles and authors, but not the cover, which is called spine out. Lighting is an important element that should not be overlooked also. Both display and in-store lighting help create the proper image and also draw consumers' eyes around the store and onto merchandise, and they ultimately encourage a customer to purchase the product. Likewise, in-store graphics such as art, photography, and signs form an important visual communication link between the store and its customers by providing much-needed information on how to shop in the store. The two primary objectives of a retail store environment, which are creating the desired store image and increasing space productivity amount to an extension of the three basic tasks or strategies that all retailers perform in order to have a chance at success. Those are get customers into the store, convert these consumers into customers by having them purchase merchandise, and do this in the most effective manner possible that's consistent with the level of service your customers expect. The starting point in creating this image is the merchandise carried in the store, along with the retailer's promotional activities, customer service, cleanliness, and sales force. The name of the store itself is a great influence. Even the uniforms worn by the store clerks leave an impression. The consumer's image of a store is a combination of out-of-store factors like location, advertising, and publicity, and the various services offered, plus the dozens of in-store variables perceived by the consumer. Although advertising and other promotional activities are important in establishing a desired store image, the store itself makes the most significant and lasting impression on consumers' collective consciousness, and it's here that the retailers must focus great energy. When customers are visiting a store or its website, the retailer must also convince them to make a purchase. Therefore, a store must increase its space productivity, a goal that is summarized in a simple but powerful truism of retailing. The more merchandise customers are exposed to that is presented in an orderly manner, the more they tend to buy. By carefully planning the store environment, the retailer can encourage customers to flow through the entire store, or at least through more shopping areas, and see a wider variety of merchandise. As a general rule of thumb, customers need to pass within 4 feet of the merchandise for it to capture their attention and cause them to slow down. The proper use of in-store advertising and displays will let the customer know what's happening in other departments and encourage a visit to those areas. Retailers are often finding that incorporating new advances in technology can help stimulate sales. Another factor that affects space productivity is the amount of merchandise a shopper is generally exposed to on an average shopping trip. A good way to increase sales is to increase the overall amount of merchandise within the store and thus the amount of merchandise the customer is exposed to. But it's important that the retailer not have merchandise pushed into every conceivable nook and cranny in the store, because then customers can't get to it. Another factor that detracts from space productivity is shrinkage, or the loss of merchandise through theft, loss, and damage. It's called shrinkage because retailers usually do not know what happens to the missing items, only that inventory levels in the store has somehow shrunk. To increase space productivity, retailers today must incorporate planning, merchandise presentation, and design strategies that minimize shrinkage by avoiding displaying merchandise in hidden areas of the store. They should also seek to reduce the number of times merchandise must be moved, during which time damage and loss can occur. If you look at Exhibit 13.2 in the book, it shows you a list of warning signs that managers should look out for, because each warning sign indicates a speed bump waiting to drive customers away from the store. Most shoppers cannot consciously identify the elements of a good store, but they certainly know when these elements are missing. In retailing, the term floor plan indicates where merchandise and customer service departments are located, how customers circulate through the store, and how much space is dedicated to each department. The floor plan, which is based around a predicted demand for the store's targeted consumers, serves as a backbone for this store and its fundamental structure around which every other element of the store environment takes shape. Successful retailers analyze their sales along with the demographics of the store's trading area when developing a store plan. They then structure the merchandise that needs to be in each store. This is called micro-retailing, and it means that each store's offerings are tailored to the trading area they serve. Successful retailers place merchandise in key strategic locations. The store's layout and design, including merchandise location, must be carefully planned to meet the retailer's merchandising goals, make the store easy to understand and shop, and allow merchandise to be effectively presented. The starting point for developing a floor plan is analyzing how the available store space usually measured in square footage, should be allocated to various departments. This allocation can be based on mathematical calculations of the returns generated by different types of merchandise. There's 5 basic types of space needed in a store. You have the back room, the offices and other functional spaces, aisles, service areas and other non-selling areas, wall merchandise space, and floor merchandise space. To determine the most productive allocation of space, the retailer first must analyze the profitability and productivity of various categories of merchandise. There are several methods for measuring profitability and productivity. Regardless of the method used for measuring these things, the results must relate some type of output performance measure to the amount of space used in the store in order to get a productivity figure to help determine the best allocation of the square footage. 2 situations may cause a retailer to perform these tasks: revising the space allocation of an existing store or planning a new store. Some retailers will look at improving space productivity in existing stores. So any retailer that has occupied its store for a decade will always find that it can benefit substantially from a fresh analysis of its existing space allocation. When you're looking at space allocations for a new store, you have to start with you have to create a whole new store format. You want to look at industry standards. You want to maybe pull from previous experience with similar formats. Another thing that you can use is planograms. After retailers have allocated space for all of their departments, they then decide how and where retail products should be displayed in the stores. A planogram is a graphic schematic that illustrates how and where a retailer's merchandise should be displayed on the shelf in order to increase customer purchases. The schematic points out not only the location of the item, but also the desired quantity, including the number of facing and the items adjacent to the products. A planogram is designed to allow the retailer to increase space productivity by taking into account inventory turnover, space, and inventory investment requirements, and gross margins of the SKUs. The circulation pattern not only ensures efficient movement of large numbers of shoppers through the store, exposing them to more merchandise, but also determines the character of the store. There are 4 basic layouts that are used today. There's free flow, grid, loop, and spine. The simplest type of store layout is the free flow layout, which is shown here. And this is where fixtures and merchandise are grouped into free-flowing patterns on the sales floor. Customers are encouraged to flow freely through the fixtures since there are usually no defined traffic patterns in the store. This type of layout works well in small stores, usually less than 5,000 square feet, where customers wish to browse through all of the merchandise at the same time. Generally, the merchandise is of the same type, such as fashion apparel, perhaps categorized only into tops and bottoms. If there's a greater variety of merchandise, a free flow layout fails to provide cues as to where one department stops and another starts, and that confuses the customer. Another traditional form of store layout is a grid, in which the counters and fixtures are placed in long rows or runs, usually at right angles throughout the store. You can see that grid here. Customers circulate up and down through the fixtures, and in fact, the grid layout is often referred to as a maze. The grid is a both historical and contemporarily popular shopping layout. It's best used in retail environments in which the majority of customers wish to shop the entire store. As shown here, a loop layout, sometimes called the racetrack layout, provides a major customer aisle that begins at the entrance, loops through the store, usually in the shape of a circle, square, or rectangle, and then returns the customer to the front of the store. The loop can be a powerful space productivity tool. The major benefit of the loop layout is that it exposes shoppers to the greatest possible amount of merchandise. An effective circulation pattern must first guide customers throughout the store to encourage browsing and cross-shopping. Along the way, shoppers must be able to easily see and understand merchandise to the right and the left. So ideally, the main aisle should never stray more than 60 feet from any merchandise. The spine layout is shown here, and it's essentially a variation of the free flow, grid, and loop layouts and combines the advantages of all three in certain circumstances. A spine layout is based on a single main aisle running from the front to the back of the store, transporting customers in both directions. On either side of the spine, each merchandise department branches off toward the back or side walls. Within the departments, either a free flow or grid layout can be used depending on the type of merchandise and the fixtures used. The spine is heavily used in medium-sized specialty stores, either hard lines or soft lines ranging from 2,000 to 10,000 square feet. Recently, retailers have been increasing their emphasis on presentation as competition has grown and stores try to squeeze more sales out of existing or less square footage. Two basic types of merchandise presentation include visual merchandising and on-shelf merchandising. Store design is the element most responsible for the first of the two goals in planning the store environment, creating a distinctive and memorable store image. Store design encompasses both the exterior and interior of the store. There are literally hundreds of details in the store's design, and all must work together to create the desired store ambiance, which is the overall feeling or mood projected by the store throughout the aesthetic appeal to the human senses. If the retail store can be compared to a book, then the storefront or the store exterior is like the book cover. It must be noticeable, easily identified by passing motorists and mall shoppers, and memorable. The storefront must clearly identify the name and general nature of the store and give some hint as to the merchandise inside. Generally, the storefront design includes all exterior signage and the architecture of the storefront itself. In many cases, the storefront includes display windows, which serve as an advertising medium for the store. There are dozens of design elements that go into the physical space. Interior designing can be broken into two elements: the finishes applied to the surfaces and the architectural shape. Another important, though overlooked, item in the successful store design is lighting. Retailers have come to understand how lighting can greatly enhance store sales. Lighting design is not limited to simple light levels. Contemporary lighting design requires an in-depth knowledge of electrical engineering and the effect of light and color and texture. Retailers have learned that different types and levels of lighting can have a significant impact on sales. Increasingly, retailers are recognizing that lighting is a large contributor to energy costs and energy waste, and thus energy efficient lighting is a very high priority in both new buildings and store remodeling. Effective store design appeals to the human senses of sight, hearing, smell, and touch. Obviously, the majority of design activity in retail stores focused on affecting sight. Research has shown that senses other than sight can also be very important, and as a result, many retailers are beginning to engineer the smells and sounds in their stores. Smell is believed to be most closely linked to all of the senses to memory and emotions. Retailers hope that using smells as an in-store marketing tool will put customers in the mood. Regardless of the smell used, it must be consistent with the store's image. The type of aroma to use depends on the merchandise being sold in the target market. Retailers have piped music into their stores for generations, believing that a musical backdrop will create a more relaxing environment and encourage customers to stay longer. Increasingly, music is being seen as a valuable marketing tool because the right music can create an environment that is both soothing and reflective of the merchandise being offered. Retailers believe that while the tempo of the music affects how long shoppers stay in a store, the type of music must also be influential on how much they purchase. Visual communications include in-store signage and graphics. Because these visual communications are inanimate objects that stay permanently in place, they require a one-time only installation cost and low maintenance, and can be relied on to perform their function the same way for every shopper. When carefully balanced with personal service, visual communications with its reliability and low cost can create an effective selling environment and are therefore becoming an important tool in the store designer's tool belt. A visual communication program includes the name, the logo, the retail identity, institutional signage, directional and department signage, category signage, point of sale signage, and lifestyle graphics. So that was all for Chapter 13. Let's move into Chapter 14, which is reframing retail strategy. This chapter, we argue that most lines of retailing, most retail enterprises, and most retail executives need to reframe their mindset away from buying and selling merchandise to what we call a service-dominant logic or mindset. Retailing is virtually synonymous with merchandising, and merchandising is synonymous with goods or tangible offerings. Despite the abundance of merchandise we now witness in virtually any city around the world, this abundance was not always the situation. In fact, throughout most of human civilization, there was a large scarcity of manufactured or processed goods. Several hundred years ago, retail merchants had a difficult time acquiring and building merchandise assortments. Also, during this time, travel was slow before the invention of railroads and motor vehicles and airplanes. The third major constraint was slow communication. So assortment, travel, communication constraints meant that when consumers visited the village's town square or relatively few specialty retail merchants that lined the narrow streets, they saw nothing evenly remotely similar to what you would find today as you visit the retailers within just a couple miles of where you work and live. So let's look at how things have changed. So over the long history of human civilization, retailing can be categorized as going through three eras. The timing of these three eras is specific to each country and culture. In fact, some parts of the world are still in era 1. So there's going to market, or to market for short, marketing to customers, and marketing with customers. The to market era for most of the developed world is generally the time period prior to the 1900s. In the United States in 1900, less than 30% of the population lived in cities. Today, it's just about the opposite, with only 20% living in rural areas. The United States in 1900 was still largely rural, and the West and South largely unsettled. Air travel and transport was several decades away. Generally, merchandise and goods moved primarily by railroads and by waterways. During this era, the major challenge was bringing merchandise to the market. Most retailers could succeed if they could get plentiful and timely supplies of merchandise and keep their stores freshly stocked with new merchandise. The retail market was synonymous with the city, and the larger cities, the larger markets, the larger the retailer. The largest retailers were the department stores such as Marshall Field in Chicago and Macy's in New York City. Not long after 1900, as transport and communication systems improved, it became much easier to bring or transport goods to the market. Consequently, there was an increase in retail competition as more and more merchants were able to fill their stores with goods. Some retailers that were successful recognized that they could replicate their stores in different geographic areas of the city and then across cities and across states. The Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, A&P, became the first U.S.-based chain store in 1859. However, it wasn't until 1920s when rapid growth of chain stores occurred. Many of the chain stores also became heavily price and promotionally oriented as they developed more efficient stores and used price and promotion to market to and sell to customers. After 1900, retail advertising also witnessed rapid growth. Local newspapers were filled with retail advertisements, and net news and magazines grew rapidly, as did print circulars, outdoor billboards, and radio advertising. This was the golden age of advertising, as this pervasive tool was increasingly used to market to and persuade customers to shop. The marketing with era of retailing can also be thought of as the era of active collaboration between retailers and their customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders, such as employees. Long-term relationships become a central premise of retail planning, and the retailer begins to view itself as a support system for all of its stakeholders, with the customer most central, because only the customer can bring new revenue or cash into the firm. Suppliers and other stakeholders are also important, but usually they are users of cash versus providers of cash. Triggering or stimulating this era of marketing is a major change in retail management thinking with regard to how the retailer views resources and their management. Historically, business viewed resources as tangible and static things such as natural resources, equipment, fixtures, and facilities. These resources actually have a special name: operant resources. Operant resources are those that humans act upon or do something with in order to create effects. Their resources are static and tangible in nature and can be exhausted or depleted. Incidentally, they are also the resources that are on the retailer's balance sheet. Over the last several decades, it became increasingly recognized that the second type of resource is dynamic and often intangible. Operant is the label given to these resources because they are those resources that can act on and produce effects. These resources, rather than being depleted, can be expanded and grown. They include such things as employee skills and knowledge, the core competencies of an organization, or its dynamic capabilities. A retailer's intangible resources are seldom on the balance sheet. If you look at Exhibit 14.3 in the book, it'll show you the value of intangibles measured by what's referred to as price-to-book ratio, where the price is the price of a share of stock, and the book is the book value of a share of stock. The higher the price-to-book ratio, the higher the intangible assets relative to tangible or balance sheet assets. Another trend that has resulted in the shift to more collaborative relationships with suppliers, employees, and customers is improved or lower cost of telecommunication. During the Market II era, communication was primarily broadcast on the one-to-many model. So a retailer would broadcast a radio or a TV advertisement or run an advertisement in a newspaper or magazine. With employees and suppliers, much of this one-to-many model of communication was employed because the retailer developed standardized procedures that over time took the form of the employee handbook or manual, or the buyer's handbook or manual. Essentially, these printed documents of rules and procedures were broadcast media that communicated rules and procedures. With the invention and phenomenal growth of the internet over the last quarter century, coupled with the rapid decline in computation and communication costs, many-to-many communication networks emerge, perhaps best illustrated with social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Many names or labels could be used to capture the new management mindset that retailers and businesses in general are moving toward. However, it's very often referred to as service-dominant or service-centric mindset. Service is defined as an application of knowledge and skills through deeds, process, and performances for the benefit of another. This definition has the following features. It involves doing something of benefit for the customer, suppliers, and employees. It involves interaction between others because the deeds, process, and performances that comprise the service are not done in isolation, but in interaction with each other. And it involves the application of knowledge and skills that are operant resources that can provide the retailer with a competitive advantage. Service is not defined as what a good or tangible product is, but rather service is a transcending concept. For service to be perceived as a transcending concept, it needs to be recognized that the service can be provided in three primary forms: direct, indirectly via good, or through education. Probably the way we most often think of service is when it is provided directly to you, or in general, when one person serves another. We see this all around us and often not in the marketplace. For example, when a barber or beautician cuts and styles your hair, or when a dentist examines your teeth and provides teeth cleaning services, or when someone washes your car. A service can also be provided indirectly through a good. This views all goods as service appliances. The person is performing self-service, but with the aid of a tangible good or product. Finally, a service can be provided through education. Often when the retailer provides information or demonstrates the product, they are essentially educating the customer on how to use a product and thus providing a service. Some apparel stores provide short courses on how to dress, while a department store do the same for how to apply cosmetics. The service designation captures very well the marketing with error and mode of thinking. When the barber or beautician or the dentist is performing a service, they're doing so in concert with the beneficiary of the service. When a good is a service appliance, it's being used by the beneficiary, which is interaction with the product, so in a sense, with the creator of the product. And finally, when service is done through education, there is always the need to interact with the learner. Service as a mindset and dominant logic is grounded on 4 principles. Service is the basis of human exchange. People are always co-creators of value. All people are resource integrators, and each person uniquely determines value. Consider the prehistory of retailing, when perhaps we have 2 individuals or families, and one specializes in fishing and the other goes in growing wheat. Each has developed his or her knowledge and skills to a very high level. So one person has more fish than he or she needs, and the other has more wheat. They exchange, and each is better off. We see the result or output of human action, but not the processes or performances that led to this output. That's because these processes and performances are often invisible and always intangible. Using the prior definition of service, what we can observe is that the fisher is exchanging his or her sea-based protein gathering knowledge and skills in return for the farmer's soil-based carbohydrate growing and gathering knowledge and skills. Or essentially, service is being exchanged for service, and hence service is a fundamental basis of exchange. Because service is the fundamental basis of exchange, it's also the basis of all competition. Competing in intangibles also provides the retailer a competitive advantage, because intangibles are hard to copy versus tangible resources that can be easily copied or purchased in the marketplace. Adopting a service-dominant mindset puts the customer at the center of the economic and social system within which the retailer operates. The customer-centric view is so extreme that it suggests that the retailer begins not with its capabilities and skills, but with developing a deep understanding of its customers or potential customers and how they are going about their ordinary lives to enhance them. Density is the best combination of resources that are mobilized to a time and place for a particular individual to solve their problem or problems, or for them to pursue opportunities at an optimal value or cost result. Density is actually driven largely by population size and population density, and this occurs in cities. Density is more and more facilitated via the internet, which overcomes many geographic constraints. Probably the current market offering that comes closest to maximum density is Google or other popular information search engines. They're able to bring together a large number of information resources at a time and place where needed for a particular individual seeking specific information. But the information is ranked, ordered, and not very well integrated. Perhaps one of the biggest retail opportunities is for retailers to think of themselves as being a customer consultant and then advise the customer on how to maximize their density. So I very briefly went over chapter 14. Really, it shows that we're moving from the mindset of high profits, making sure we sell whatever we can sell, to building those relationships with the customers and making sure that the customer feels comfortable coming into your store and has trust in your store and your salespeople. So that in turn will help you build on your profits, because you'll have long-term customers who will then refer you to their friends and family. So again, that's all for chapters 13 and 14. As I say every time, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.